is that the world-famous sanctuary. Can't you believe this duel? Anne-Marie, you brought me Ruth.
You take care of it. I can't handle it.
Okay.
Ruth Buzzi appeared on the set of Laugh-In in 1970 for what appeared to be a routine sketch with no special significance. Moments later, she made a statement that would be catastrophic for her professional life. The FBI began monitoring her, sponsors withdrew their support, and the producers of the show received a threatening phone call, which brought about a complete change in the situation. Finally, the truth about the most controversial moment in television history is being revealed, and it is more sinister than anyone could have imagined. Television comedies in 1967 followed a pattern that was already well known. The beginnings of jokes were crystal clear, the conclusions of sketches were foreseeable, and the pace of variety shows was consistent. On the other hand, George Schlatter and Ed Friendly desired a different proposition, a show that had a sense of vitality, something that was in sync with the tumultuous energy of the world outside, was what they desired. As a result of participating in counterculture gatherings such as Love-Ins and Be-Ins, they came up with the idea for Laugh-In, a comedy experiment that would violate every rule that is associated with television. A sensory assault was what Schlatter referred to it as. There was no gradual transition into jokes, nor was there any breaks for the audience to catch their breath. Instead, it proceeded to recite a series of jokes in rapid succession, one after the other. Over 350 quick-cut segments were included in each episode, and they ranged from satire to surreal humor to physical comedy. Nothing lasted for an excessively long time. One could not slow down the pace. From one moment to the next, a comedian would deliver a witty political joke. Following that, someone would show up on the screen wearing a ridiculous costume and dance across it. Inspiration came from a variety of different sources. Its humor was influenced by vaudeville and burlesque art. However, the most significant influence on it came from British satire. Ernie Kovach's experimental style was a significant contributor to its unpredictable nature. The television program known as That Was the Week That Was had already demonstrated that it was possible for television to provide a clever approach to addressing political and social issues. That concept was taken by Schlatter and Friendly, who then amplified it to its maximum potential. In order to ensure that the show never came across as preachy or predictable, they combined clever satire with absurdity all throughout. The structure itself had a distinct feel to it. The concept of using fast cuts and unexpected transitions was common in British comedy, but Laugh-In took that concept to an exceptional level. There was no obvious beginning or end to the sketches. The comedic lines appeared out of nowhere. There would be a change in the scene before the audience had a chance to react. This tumultuous energy was not accidental in any way. This was done with the intention of capturing the sensation of contemporary life, in which everything was happening at the same time. A few viewers found it to be too much to handle. Others were unable to get enough of it. Making the show go on was not a simple task. When Schlatter and Friendly presented it to executives at various networks, they were at a loss for ideas regarding how to proceed. I felt that the format was too risky. It seemed like the pace was too quick. At long last, on September 9, 1967, NBC gave in and agreed to broadcast a single special. They were conducting a test, which was something they did not anticipate going very far. But the audience's response was instantaneous. The ratings were very high. Conversations were taking place about it. A full season was ordered by NBC within a few short months. It was the first episode that established the tone for everything that came after it. The show was led by Dan Rowan and Dick Martin, who were able to bounce off of each other and engage in quick banter. The addition of guest stars such as Barbara Feldon and Flip Wilson contributed to the variety of personalities that were present. Regular episodes such as The Cocktail Party and Mod World were responsible for introducing viewers to the distinctive aesthetic of the show. One-liners were delivered by comedians through small doors on the joke wall, which became a signature piece of the organization. In addition, there was a program called News of the Future, in which they made a number of outrageous forecasts, some of which were actually realized, such as Ronald Reagan becoming president. In the beginning, NBC believed that Laugh-In would merely be a time slot filler, competing with long-running shows such as Gunsmoke. However, by the time it reached its second season, it had become the show with the highest ratings on television. Everyone found it to be appealing. It is possible for parents and adolescents to watch it together. They enjoyed the slapstick humor very much. Some people enjoyed the witty and pointed satire. Something in Laugh-In would make you laugh, regardless of who you were or what you were doing. Despite the fact that Dan Rowan and Dick Martin were an unlikely pair, the fact that they were perfect for Rowan and Martin's Laugh-In was precisely because of this. Beginning with their performances in nightclubs, they developed a comedy act that was based on contrast during their time there. Martin played the role of the clueless goofball who never quite understood what was going on, while Rowan was the smooth talker who was always in control. There was a continuation of that chemistry on television. The first episode of Laugh-In aired on January 22, 1968. And it was unlike anything else that was broadcast at the time. It was a show that was not only able to find an audience, but it was also quick, unpredictable, and full of absurd skits and one-liners. By the 8th episode, it had already risen to the top of the ratings in the United States. Rowan and Martin were able to prevent the insanity from entirely deviating from its intended course. Even though everything around them was in complete disarray, the show was able to maintain its structure thanks to their back-and-forth banter. There would be a ridiculous statement made by Martin. Rowan would roll his eyes, and the audience would go absolutely wild for it. Their signature phrase, which was used at the conclusion of each episode and consisted of Rowan saying, "Good night, Dick," and Martin responding with "Good night, Dick," became one of the most well-known catchphrases related to television. Nevertheless, they were more than just hosts. There was a recurring role for Martin as Leonard Swizzle, a tipsy partygoer who always seemed to be a little too drunk to function, while Rowan played the role of General Bull Wright, a parody of over-the-top military figures. It seemed as though the show was moving at a breakneck pace, as it went from one sketch to the next without any prior warning. When you were unable to catch a joke, another one was already on its way to you. Jokes came and went so quickly. This frantic energy was something that had never been seen before on television, and it completely revolutionized comedy. Without Laugh-In, late-night talk shows like Saturday Night Live would not have been able to come into existence. Some of the most successful individuals to emerge from Laugh-In were not even well known when they joined the organization. One of them was the actress Goldie Hawn. When she first appeared on the show in 1968, she was a bubbly blonde who appeared to laugh her way through every joke. The reality was that she was not acting at all. She was advised by producer George Schlatter not to rehearse what she was going to say, so that her responses would be authentic. She became a fan favorite almost immediately due to the infectious nature of her laugh. A mere 2 years later, she became one of the most prominent stars in Hollywood after winning an Academy Award for her performance in Cactus Flower. When Lily Tomlin joined in 1969, she made an immediate impact on the company. Not content with merely performing, she also conceived of characters. Ernestine, a telephone operator with a nasal voice who made life difficult for anyone who picked up the phone, was widely considered to be one of her most talented employees. Each and every call began in the same manner. "With all due respect, is this the party to whom I am addressing this message?" Then there was Edith Ann, a young girl of 5 years old who would sit in a massive rocking chair and deliver lengthy monologues, always concluding with, "And that is the truth." The fact that Tomlin was able to create characters that were so memorable helped her become one of the show's most prominent stars. That was not the end of her achievements. In the years that followed, she became one of the most well-respected comedians in Hollywood and went on to star in films such as 9 to 5. Henry Gibson had a distinctive manner of writing. While the majority of the show was chaotic and full of noise, he managed to keep things straightforward. He would then proceed to take a step forward, raise a massive flower, and recite a poem written by Henry Gibson. After that, he would recite a brief poem with a deadpan delivery that was either completely absurd or a subtle commentary on the events that were occurring at the time. The show's wild energy was perfectly balanced by his calm presence, which was the perfect contrast. The use of his platform to speak about environmental issues, write poetry, and write articles about sustainability long before it became a popular cause was something he did in addition to using it to make people laugh. It would have been impossible to ignore Joanne Worley. A booming voice, outrageous costumes, and a comedic style that demanded attention were all characteristics that she possessed. Each and every joke that she told felt like a dramatic performance. Whenever she wanted to make a joke even funnier, she would frequently sing in an exaggerated operatic style or insert a dramatic pause before giving the punchline. One of her most well-known running gags was a collection of jokes that were directed against chickens. These jokes were so bizarre that they became a part of her identity. Ruth Buzzi and Art Johnson were the ones who were responsible for some of the most memorable moments that occurred during the show. Wolfgang was a character that Johnson created. He was a German soldier who would suddenly emerge from behind a bush and say something like, "This is very interesting, but it is absolutely stupid." One of the lines from the show that was most frequently cited was that particular phrase. Tyrone F. Horney, also known as Horneye, was another one of his characters. He was a creepy old man who spent each episode unsuccessfully flirting with Gladys Ormsby, who was played by Ruth Buzzi. It was a flawless performance on her part. In addition to being irritable and sour, Gladys was always prepared to throw her purse at Tyrone whenever he got too close to her. There was a resounding round of laughter from the audience each time she struck him. The routine was straightforward, but it never became monotonous. Buzzi's performance elevated her to the status of one of the show's most prominent stars, resulting in her being nominated for 5 Emmys and winning a Golden Globe. One of the things that set Laugh-In apart from other shows was the presence of guest stars. It was impossible to predict who would show up. One time, John Wayne made an appearance while dressed as a bunny. In addition, Sammy Davis Jr. added his own unique brand of cool to the sketches. In addition, Orson Welles, who is well known for his deep and dramatic voice, participated in the fun. In contrast, none of the guests were more unexpected than Richard Nixon. Richard Nixon did something in 1968 that nobody anticipated he would do. When he appeared on national television, he made an attempt to be humorous. The candidate for the Republican presidential nomination looked directly into the camera for a period of 6 awkward seconds and asked, "Sock it to me." It was a stiff delivery from him. Even though his tone was all over the place, it was effective. The audience laughed. This minuscule moment may have been the deciding factor in his victory in one of the most closely contested elections in the history of the United States. The nation was in a state of disarray during that year. Despite its length, the Vietnam War continued. The streets were filled with protesters. Assassinations had been committed against both Martin Luther King Jr. and Robert Kennedy. America had the impression that it was falling apart. Following his defeats in the presidential election of 1960 and the race for governor of California in 1962, Richard Nixon was attempting to make a comeback in the political arena. Because of his image, he had the most trouble. People regarded him as solemn, unfeeling, and out of touch with reality. Following that, Rowan and Martin's Laugh-In took place. It was the most watched television program in the United States. Despite its size, volume, and unpredictability, it was packed with short comedic sketches and catchphrases that were extremely popular among younger audiences. Anything and everything, including politics, was made fun of in the show. Nixon's advisors were of the opinion that it would be a terrible idea for him to appear on Laugh-In radio. Some people thought that it could make him appear more approachable. A conservative writer for the show named Paul Keyes, who was also a supporter of Nixon, exerted a lot of effort to get it. It was his contention that a brief moment of humor could alter the way that people perceived Nixon. By the 12th of September, Nixon had arrived at the Burbank studios of NBC in order to film his segment. However, there could be a problem. Those in charge of the production wanted him to make a silly statement, such as, "You bet your sweet bippy." Nixon did not agree. It was important to him that he not appear foolish, so he did not understand the phrase. At long last, he gave in to my demands and agreed to one line. Even that required some effort. A total of 6 takes were required to achieve a version in which he did not appear distressed or perplexed. In a later statement, the show's producer, George Schlatter, stated that he hurried the footage out of the studio because he was concerned that Nixon's team might attempt to prevent it from being broadcast. The episode was broadcast on September 16th, and most people were taken aback by it. The appearance of Nixon lasted for only 6 seconds, but it was so unexpected that it elicited a significant response from the audience. Due to his awkwardness, people laughed at him. Despite the fact that he did not appear to be hilarious or charming, he appeared to be human. That was important in the realm of politics. Given that Laugh-In was the most popular show on television at the time, it was inevitable that Nixon's appearance would be seen by millions of people. It is believed by some political analysts that it assisted him in winning over voters who were undecided, particularly younger voters. The race for the election was extremely close. It was by a margin of less than 1% of the popular vote that he prevailed over Hubert Humphrey. Given the closeness of the competition, every single second was crucial. Humphrey, on the other hand, committed an error. In addition, he was invited to appear on Laugh-In, where he was provided with a straightforward line. Yes, I would need you to give it to me. However, he declined the offer. He was concerned that it would give the impression that he was not serious. Humphrey did not agree to take the risk, while Nixon did. After everything was said and done, one candidate embraced modern media, while the other candidate avoided it. It is common practice for politicians to make appearances on late-night talk shows today, but in 1968, doing so was considered a risky endeavor, and for Nixon, it was time well spent. Harry Belafonte filmed a segment for Rowan and Martin's Laugh-In in 1969, but it was never broadcast. The segment was never broadcast. On purpose, it was intended to be a forceful declaration. He sang the calypso song "Don't Stop the Carnival" in front of the audience. However, what was going on behind him was the source of the real impact. Instead of the bright and colorful set that is typically used, the screen was filled with footage from the demonstrations that took place in Chicago during the Democratic National Convention in 1968. There were protesters in the streets who were being beaten by police. The air was filled with tear gas. Protesters shouted their slogan, "The entire world is watching." It was unfiltered, genuine, and extremely difficult to ignore. At the time, the demonstrations were among the most shocking events in the history of the modern United States. There were thousands of people who gathered in Chicago to voice their opposition to the Vietnam War. They encountered a large number of law enforcement officers and members of the National Guard. It was on August 28 that the violence reached its peak outside of the Conrad Hilton Hotel. Officers brandished batons at protesters who were not armed. The use of tear gas caused crowds to flee. As a result of journalists photographing the chaos on live television, the entire nation was forced to witness what was taking place. Now that a year had passed, Belafonte desired to ensure that people did not forget about things. NBC declined to broadcast it. The executives were of the opinion that it was too risky. They were concerned about the potential for backlash, particularly from conservative audiences and advertisers. When it was initially shown on television in 1968, the footage had already caused widespread outrage across the country. With the addition of Belafonte's song, it became even more argumentative than it already was. That risk was not something that the network was willing to take. In order to prevent the entire segment from ever being seen, they have cut it. Censorship of this kind was not a breakthrough. During the 1960s, television networks exercised a great deal of control over the content that was broadcast. They refrained from discussing contentious issues such as racism, war, and police brutality because they did not wish to alienate viewers or sponsors. In spite of the fact that it is known for breaking boundaries, the show Laugh-In had to walk a fine line. In a later statement, the show's creator, George Schlatter, admitted that the decision to cut Belafonte's segment was a missed opportunity. It had the potential to be one of the most potent moments in the history of television. At no point did Belafonte remain silent. NBC's decision was deemed to be cowardly by him. Over the course of many years, he had utilized his music and fame to advocate for civil rights. According to him, this censorship was evidence that networks were more concerned with maintaining the comfort of their audience than they were with telling the truth. The segment that was lost became a what-if, a moment that had the potential to mark the course of history, but it was removed before anyone had the opportunity to witness it. Other than that, in 1969, Rowan and Martin's Laugh-In made a direct attack on Spiro Agnew, who was serving as vice president at the time. When he attacked those who were critical of the Nixon administration, he became accustomed to using language that was exaggerated and dramatic. The phrase, "nattering nabobs of negativism," which was written specifically for him by speechwriter William Safire, is also considered to be one of his most famous lines. He was a fan of alliteration and frequently used phrases such as pusillanimous pussyfooters and effete corps of impudent snobs. His language made him an easy target for satire, and Laugh-In took advantage of the opportunity to exaggerate his style, thereby transforming him into a caricature that was larger than life. This was more than just a joke at his expense. It was a sign of the growing divide between politicians and the media. Agnew and the Nixon White House were not amused by this. According to reports, his office called NBC to complain about it. Agnew wanted to rally Nixon's silent majority by attacking the press and intellectuals, and Laugh-In was one of the most popular shows on television, reaching millions of viewers each week. However, by making fun of Agnew, it demonstrated how comedy was becoming a powerful tool for political commentary. Instead, he made himself an easy punchline. His reaction to the parody only reinforced the idea that he could dish it out, but couldn't take it. The more he fought back, the more comedians latched onto him as a source of endless material. At a time when the nation was deeply divided over issues such as Vietnam and civil rights, comedy was becoming more than just a form of entertainment. It was shaping public perception. This moment demonstrated how humor could expose the absurdity of politics. An additional method by which Laugh-In left its mark was through the Flying Fickle Finger of Fate Award, which was one of the most well-known running gags on the show. The award was first presented in 1968 and was presented to individuals or organizations that were responsible for actions that were either ridiculous or harmful. The trophy itself was a gold hand with a pointing finger mounted on a wooden base. It was a humorous yet direct way of calling someone out. President Lyndon B. Johnson was one of the earliest winners of the trophy. The show made fun of Johnson for his role in escalating the Vietnam War. Additionally, the Pentagon was given the award for wasting taxpayer money on directories that became obsolete almost immediately after they were initially published. Laugh-In had a way of turning real frustrations into humor, calling out government waste and hypocrisy, without making the show feel heavy or preachy. The Fickle Finger of Fate was so effective because it made serious points in a way that felt lighthearted. By turning political criticism into comedy, the show avoided outright censorship, but the people it mocked took notice. There were times when the responses from politicians made the joke even funnier. This particular segment demonstrated that television not only served as a medium for entertainment, but also had the ability to influence public discourse. In the year 1970, Laugh-In took an even greater risk by airing a sketch that caused instant controversy. The sketch depicted police officers as pigs, a depiction that had been popularized by the Black Panther Party, which had used it in cartoons to protest police brutality. This kind of imagery being broadcast on mainstream television was shocking at the time, and the Federal Bureau of Investigation regarded it as a significant issue. Edgar Hoover, the Bureau of Investigation, had initiated COINTELPRO, a covert operation with the purpose of discrediting radical groups. Hoover had referred to the Black Panthers as the most significant threat to the security of the United States of America. Any media that appeared to be sympathetic to the Black Panthers was considered to be dangerous. As soon as the sketch was broadcast on Laugh-In, there was an immediate backlash. Law enforcement organizations were incensed and accused the show of spreading anti-police propaganda. The controversy reflected the deep divide that exists in the country. However, some viewers interpreted the sketch as an honest reflection of the times, while others interpreted it as an attack on law enforcement. Protests against police brutality were becoming more common, and the Black Panthers had forced a national conversation about racial injustice. Laugh-In broke comedic ground, but not without controversy. The character Tiny Alice, played by Dick Martin in drag, reinforced harmful LGBTQ+ stereotypes, drawing criticism from activists who wanted respectful representation. Creator George Schlatter defended the show's equal opportunity satire, but critics argued marginalized groups deserved better. One of Laugh-In's most iconic moments was Arte Johnson's catchphrase, "Very interesting." Originally an improvisation, producers worried it would disrupt the show's fast pace, but audiences loved it, making it a TV staple. Goldie Hawn, despite her bubbly persona, struggled behind the scenes. The intense pressure and fast pace led to panic attacks and daily tears. She eventually left in 1970, earning an Oscar for Cactus Flower and becoming a mental health advocate. Even words as simple as pregnant were controversial. NBC initially banned it, fearing backlash, but Schlatter refused to comply, marking a small victory in television's evolving standards. By Laugh-In's fifth season, its magic was fading. Key cast members like Hawn and Lily Tomlin left, ratings dropped 40%, and Schlatter's departure sealed its fate. The show was canceled in 1973, with Dan Rowan saying, "We have just run out of gas." Though it ended, Laugh-In paved the way for Saturday Night Live, inspiring its fast-paced humor and satirical edge. The torch was passed, but Laugh-In's impact on comedy remains undeniable.